Back together again, eh?
Yeah.
Let's play.
Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Suter. Thank you all so much for joining us. Today we have returning guest Theo, who just he called me up and said, "Nick, I had such a blast last time. It was just so much fun. Could you please have me back?" And I was just like, "Let me check my account, my schedule. Yeah, we can fit you in. We can squeeze you in. I mean, we have a lot of very important guests, but." For a favor, we'll bring you back. Theo, how are you?
Hello, good evening. How are you?
I'm doing good, thanks. You remember Xandering from your first time, and this is Commander Lance McMillan, who hosts Downtime, but has an interest in this subject. So for those of you, us who didn't see the first time where you left us at the altar, we were sitting here having a great show. We were having a great show, and you're like, I got better things to do. So, why don't you?
It's like saying, I'm sure you remember Isandering, and I'm like, I'm not sure why you would. I'm pretty forgettable, and we didn't have a lot of quality time together.
No, we didn't. Unfortunately, life decided to knock me over the side of the head mid-live stream, and I had to go and deal with that.
And we joke
when that happens.
We joke, but it was absolutely understandable. So it was. I'm delighted that we were able to sort of reschedule and do this again, and hopefully, it's in time. There's always a hiccup of some kind, so we'll see what today's is going to be. Now you were a former policeman, and
yes.
You decided to get into Dictators versus Democrats. Why did you do that? What inspired you to start that organization?
So, usual mix of push and pull factors. Being a journalist was pretty high on the top of the list of things that I wanted to do at sort of high school level. But life circumstances pushed me towards the police. And being a police officer in the United Kingdom, you're politically restricted. So you're not allowed to have a public opinion on political matters and air that opinion for perfectly reasonable reasons. And as the state of the world was degrading, as it is and continues to do, I was getting increasingly worried. And it sort of relit that fire, which burned low for about 18 months until it started getting hotter and hotter. And I thought, well, now is the time to resign from the service and try to pursue this. So my work is focused on the global conflict, competition, war, whatever you want to call it, between the basic ideologies of democracy and free society versus authoritarianism that we're seeing play out around the world today.
One of the things that you had said to me, and you and I met actually doing another show, we were both guests, but we got a chance to chat, and you had said that actually sort of we as a species sort of historically tend towards authoritarianism, almost as if, it's just either we find a comfort in it or it's easier. And as someone who has grown up in a democracy and his whole life up until the recent years been in what was presumed to be preordained a democracy for the rest of existence. I always thought that democracies were just sort of natural, and that was the natural state of being, despite the fact I've read Hobbes. And I said, well, okay, the Leviathan idea, I get it, but democracy. So could you just tell us how new is this idea and how important is it?
Well, the Greeks had some pretty interesting ideas about democracy, but Athenian democracy, not at all what we would describe as democracy in any way. Obviously, half of the population couldn't vote, and they indulged in the heinous practice of slavery. And it's also just very different. The phrase "roped in," for example, comes into the English language from the rope that they would occasionally use to deploy on the streets of Athens to rope people in to vote on major issues. Again, the phrase "idiot" comes from its Greek roots, coming from somebody uninterested in politics. It was a kind of democracy where everybody they considered human enough was a part of the political system and took active roles in running the nation. And didn't always go well, but it went well enough for them to be one of the cornerstones of the modern democracies in terms of ideas about various things. Sorry, repeat the question again. I got
well. Okay. As I said before, democracies to those of us who grew up in them seems like a completely natural state, the state of man. And of course, Hobbes said, and you quote, it's what's the unpleasant, the nasty, cold, brutish, and short, but I always miss the first one.
Lonesome.
Lonesome. Thank you. Yeah, that is, but we're so removed from that, it's hard to sort of remember or think about that. So, and that may also be one of the sort of downfalls of democracies. I'd like to get into how and why they start to fail. It may be that I see the same thing in science. Here I am cutting myself off again, but I see the same thing in science, which is somebody will be sitting there, drinking a mocha latte made by a machine plugged into electricity, and they'll be on their phone scrolling through, checking their email off a satellite and saying, well, what has science ever really done for me living at the age of 42? And like, science doesn't do anything. It really just doesn't. And it's just so ubiquitous we don't see it anymore. It's like the fish that goes, what's water? So I feel that way with democracy. So we're sitting there with a fish, and we're like, "What's water? What else would there really be? Why wouldn't people just overthrow a?" So that was my question: is how novel is the concept of a democracy, and how common is the alternative?
Well, the alternative is obviously is more common. You look through human history, most societies, most nations, most empires have been what we'd comfortably describe as deeply authoritarian. Now, the reach of the state in many of these nations was, of course, smaller. That the state today can reach into every aspect of your life, and authoritarian states really rather enjoy doing that. The private life is one of the first things they go after. So societies historically have tended towards authoritarianism. And the change, at least in the democratic world, is relatively recent in terms of human history, a couple hundred years. But it's been paired with the explosive acceleration of human achievement. I mean, if you look at merely just take the 20th century, in the 1910s, we're just about working out how to fly, and 60 odd years later, we're sending people to extraplanetary bodies. Like, it's enormously rapid, and that's also changed the way democracy works. So overall, societies have tended towards authoritarianism. Is that something in the human spirit? I don't know. that's something to ask a psychologist, I think. But authoritarianism.
Oh, we all
for
play psychologists here on YouTube. So
Yeah,
we
we're all
always
listen. This is
speculate anyway.
I put a disclaimer up at the beginning that says none of us are experts on anything. That's literally it takes a while before you get that, but by the time you get to it, it's like we opine on legal matters, medical matters, scientific matters, and we are not doctors, scientists. So do not so literally you can say, and I am legally allowed to diagnose people with psychiatric illnesses, and the reason is because I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not bound by psychological ethics. I didn't sign any documentation with the American Psychiatric Association, so I can diagnose whoever I want. So please, go right ahead.
Fair enough. Well, and authoritarianism is actually relatively easy for the average person. You don't, so long as you accept the Faustian pact that you never get involved in political life, then generally, not of course always, because they like to move where the goalposts are as to what you can and can't do to keep people on their toes, you can go about life in a relatively normal way. Now, that's often been paired with keeping people poor or hungry or overworked. And democracy has freed people of that, but it also makes a different deal with them, is that, well, you actually have to work for the freedoms that you enjoy. Freedom is like a muscle. If you don't use it, you will lose it. So it's a fragile thing, but I grew up in a very similar environment to you, Nick, where democracy seemed, as water is to a fish. I have always taken it as a given that I could, make rude gestures at political figures and tell them their ideas are stupid and I can't wait to get rid of them at the next round of elections. That to me is incredibly precious. And as I grew up and as I going through life, realizing that many societies today are not structured like that, and that would be an incredibly dangerous thing to do. And B, there are people in our societies who really don't like that for whatever reason, and want to alter that and move on from that.
Yeah, and it's weird kind of confluence there of because you have the wealthy and powerful and influential and the poor both kind of intersecting at that. Life would be a lot easier. Somebody else is taking care of everything and you just kind of do what you're told. It's really simple. There aren't a lot of responsibilities on you, and you're not required to have at least some sort of working knowledge of some of the issues that they're expecting you to vote on for the future. That a lot of people don't have time to become even passingly familiar with a lot of the things that they're asked to vote on. So, and the wealthy and powerful and influential want the power, and we tend to have a bit of a dopamine hit over exercising power over others.
Yeah.
So they have the ability to do that. They want to protect that, and so especially the very poor people, they have too many other things trying to just live their lives to really worry about voting on issues that will maintain a democracy or not. So it's a weird confluence of how the top and the bottom both end up crossing. Or am I just completely making stuff up?
No, I think you're relatively on the money. I was just thinking about my earlier statement that the general trend of society through history has been towards authoritarianism, and I'm wondering how much increased prosperity will change that in future, and whether or not certain societies want to keep people sort of artificially poorer than they have to be, given the technologies we have, to ensure a certain pyramid style of power.
Well,
let me
please
ask a couple questions. First, is there another option than democracy, dictatorship, authoritarian, whatever? I mean, is there a third ground that you can enter on? And secondly, which is probably a very related question, is authoritarianism and democracy a spectrum, or is it just two ends and that's where you are? You're either A or B.
Absolutely.
Not in the middle.
No, absolutely a spectrum. Nearly nothing in the world is a switch. 100%. Democracy is not an on or off. There are a number of different metrics that you have to measure to determine whether or not you could safely say this nation is democratic. There are some ways in which it's perfectly reasonable to argue that the United Kingdom is less democratic than the United States, and I would argue vice versa. At least, the United States is perhaps the United States as of 2008, maybe less the United States as of 2025. But and the same with authoritarianism. North Korea is a dystopian hellhole. I don't think anybody's going to argue with that. And Saudi Arabia is an authoritarian country, of course, dystopian in its own way, but not the kind of grinding absolute misery all the time, unless you happen to be an indentured worker there, that people in North Korea experience just as the way the state is designed. So all of these things sit on a spectrum.
Okay.
What are some of the...
I hate to derail.
Yes.
Sorry, I hate to derail things really quick, but I want you to say dystopian again.
Dystopian.
I just thought it was a very fascinating way that you said it. And I was like, wait a minute. Sorry, I had to derail. That was very awesome.
The Y was hard we're okay. Let's talk about his accent for the next 20 minutes. Thanks, Isaiah. That just tell you what. No, we'll just
I apologize. I told you I'm like the least consequential person here, and
squirrel.
I got hung up on dystopian because that was freaking awesome.
We're gonna put your new image for the background isn't going to be the constant. It's going to be a squirrel.
Yeah, that's probably accurate.
And we'll have him back just for and it's not even going to be, we're not going to talk about, the show isn't going to be about accents. We're just going to be talking in different accents. We'll do like a nice Alabama accent for him. He'll maybe have his Cockney down.
I'm so terrible at accents.
That's what'll make the show. That's really why I want to do the show, is to hear you screw it all up. Anyways.
Indian.
Yes, now that we have completely digressed off of the topic when we actually got into some good learning, and then suddenly I just threw that train all the way over there. I threw the switch and killed everyone. So
so there is actually a switch on the show. Well, I had a question. So there's a couple of different ways to measure democracy. There's the Democracy Index. I think that's put out by, I wanted to say Bloom. It's the Economist, if I recall correctly. So, and they take a bunch of metrics. The U.S. has had a very weird sudden drop right before the year in 2016, which was really just kind of all of a sudden in very many of the metrics, the U.S. had a drop. It started to go back up again. And now, for reasons it's like falling off a cliff. But what are some of the metrics that are used to measure how democratic a country is?
So I would look at things like the various rights that people are given under the law, how much those rights are actually protected and enforced. The Soviet Union gave people all sorts of rights, but it was nonsense. It was just paper. And then in terms of the health of a democracy is the level of political participation. In polling data, the level of trust people show in things like the media, things like the people they elect. The economic health as well, because that's really important. The crime rate, there is an enormous amount. But for me, it's the biggest thing is free speech, and it's the most important thing in ensuring not just a healthy democracy, but a healthy free society. I feel like all all comes from that point, or so much of it does. To criticize a political figure or major business figure is such an important right. To be able to then, if you disagree with their policy, go out and work against it. And it doesn't have to be working against it in terms of, I'm going to run against you in office. It can be, forming a pressure group, attending protests. Just the act of speaking about politics is a small act that reinforces, or can reinforce, democracy, so long as you accept the rules of the game in a democratic system. You're not going to try to restrict the freedoms of others, so long as those freedoms don't restrict the freedoms of others, etc.
But doesn't there have to be, or let me rephrase, isn't there a difference in terms of level? Because living overseas in a number of different countries, as I did, you saw places where at, say, the village level, the society was quite democratic. People all had input, to the village elder, and they could talk about what they were going to do. And if they didn't like him, they could throw him out and change it. Everything was fine there. It's when you got up to, say, the district or provincial level, let alone national level, where suddenly that authoritarianism came down like a crushing hammer. And I would argue that you can kind of have the opposite. For example, in rural areas in the U.S., where,
you have like a tyrant mayor of a small town that's
or gangs.
One or two
gangs.
families own everything, or in the Deep South, blacks can't participate. Although at the national level, technically they can, but at the lower levels, you can't. So I think it varies not just in a spectrum horizontally, but also in a spectrum vertically, if you will.
Yeah, and I jump to agree with you. I mean, but the way technology is today, it is much easier for the center, for the shadow to be cast over even the most isolated sort of village.
Very true.
The Chinese Communist Party's ability and skill at surveillance goes far beyond its borders, and the control they exert over people abroad, even non-PRC nationals, is deeply concerning.
Russia, I would argue, even more so. No.
I don't think so. I think the Chinese do an enormous amount of work, particularly on expats, where they will use, your family members still here in China, and if you don't do exactly what we tell you, they're going to suffer. Even though you've never been to China, let alone born there or lived there, and they will do that. The Russians, it's less so. High-level figures, when they leave Russia, you get out of line, and that FSB slant KGB agent, kind of bumps you with his umbrella, and bad things happen to you. But for the most part, the average person, once they've left Russia, the Russian government doesn't seem to really give a damn.
Yeah, I mean, an anecdote from one of my interviewees, she's an artist from Hong Kong, goes by LK. She described how her laptop was stolen in a Paris subway. And then her mother, who still lives in Hong Kong, was called for a meeting for tea with the police, which is a very common occurrence, especially if you happen to be related to a dissident or exile, where it's one of those meetings you can't refuse at the local police station. They'll sit and they'll essentially interrogate you for a few hours. And she was shown photographs that were held only on that laptop, and asked to account for her daughter's actions. And this kind of thing is incredibly common. We saw Chinese consular officials in Manchester There was a protest outside, a pro-Hong Kong protest, and they tried to drag one of the protesters onto consular ground, which caused a bit of a diplomatic incident as the bobbies there decided to go in and drag them back out.
That's not called a diplomatic incident, not at all.
I mean, I'd have done the same thing.
Well, I agree. But
absolutely, good job, those guys. Well done. Extra Krispy Kremes all around. But this kind of thing is very common, unfortunately, from the PRC. And there's a whole guidebook of United Front work of how to work at a society and attempt to influence it. And this is something that the PRC is very good at. The Russians less so, and the Russians have been significantly weakened by their disastrous invasion of Ukraine, where I was speaking to General Hodges earlier today. Between 900,000 and 1.2 million dead and wounded. Those are numbers that we haven't seen in some time in Europe.
Yep.
And it doesn't stop the Russians from engaging in political and hybrid warfare all over Europe, and of course attempting to influence our elections. Not to say they're going to go in and hack the voting machines, or if you use voting machines, but it's more about attempting to control the narrative on websites like Twitter, which unfortunately still people use, Facebook, etc., where they will just hammer their narrative and attempt to move the conversation in a certain direction. And this is something that I feel the democracies and the way we're set up, combined with this new technology, which nobody could conceive of when the bones and DNA of these democracies were written, we are very vulnerable to it. Usually. And every time I ask figures, what can we do? The answer tends to be education. And yes, I agree, fantastic. But that doesn't help us now. That helps us in 10 to 15 years.
Yep.
And we need help now because this is becoming a real problem.
Well, didn't Putin say that our greatest strength, our free speech, was in fact also our greatest weakness because it allowed him to exercise propaganda and pay and engage in propaganda that really he could stop if we tried to do in Russia, but he can do in the U.S. Without nearly as much difficulty.
Yeah,
I think the other side. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Come on.
I was going to say the other side of that is I think, and you'll forgive me for using this term, but from my perspective as military, this is psychological warfare is what we're talking about in this case. And it's gotten much, much more sophisticated in a very, very short time. I mean, people say, yeah, Goebbels kind of started it, but you look at that or early Bolshevik or even French revolutionary propaganda of that nature, and it's really heavy-handed and it's easy to see through it for what it is. But you look at what the Russians are doing now with manipulation of social media sites and such, and yeah, it's very sophisticated, and even people who have it explained to them and are shown that it's not, that they're being manipulated, they still fall for it on a regular basis. And I think that's the key difference is that, that technology or that doctrine, if you will, has evolved into something really, really sophisticated and deadly right now that it never was in the past.
Yeah, and it's like we've created a field of psychological warfare in which we are actually incredibly vulnerable, and we're attempting to fight on that field when it's not our home ground anymore. At least I say our. I mean the people who believe in liberal democracy, a reasonable level of capitalism, and a reasonable level of government oversight of that. It feels like websites like X are enemy
Well,
ground.
it's
to a
also
certain degree.
because I think it's also because the obvious counter to that kind of manipulative propaganda is to craft your own version to undermine the enemy's propaganda. But in a democratic society, doing that is not viewed as something proper. It's bad karma if you do that. So you've opened the door, but you haven't put up the fly screen to keep the insects from coming in, if you want.
Well, I think
Well, it's getting a lot worse too, because with the advent of AI deepfake, it's like I've gotten to the point now on X and especially Facebook, and anytime Instagram reels crop up, I avoid that website like the plague. But I don't believe them anymore. Even when there's video, even when there's audio, it's like there are so many things where you'll see something, a story. I just saw one where somebody had crafted a story together about an officer that had gotten a canine officer that had been attacked by a cougar, and his dog saved him, and they had the pictures and everything from a dash cam. Story's completely fake. It's like didn't happen. There's zero news stories from any credible source talking about this incident and the names that they use for like the canine who tragically passed away protecting his, it's like the only news story that you can find for that story is about, with that canine's name, is how he has retired and how his owner is giving him exercises to help keep him active and to work with his training so he doesn't get totally fake story. And how many people are going to go and spend the half an hour that I did to try and find the news story or any supporting evidence for something like this? They're not going to do it. It sounds plausible. They have plausible pictures, plausible video. I've seen videos of Neil deGrasse Tyson's admitting that after looking at all of the satellite pictures and all of the evidence that he's come to the conclusion that the Earth is indeed flat. I mean, it's like, you can come up with anything now, and it's so and at times, and I think this is going to get worse and worse rapidly, that you're not going to be able to believe anything that's posted.
Well, the reverse is also true. Is if I post something that's a fact that's true, the other side, all they have to do is start yelling fake news, and boom, you've lost 50% of the potential audience that would believe you because some idiot has chanted fake news without a single shred of evidence to support his accusation that it's fake.
Yeah, and I mean, talking about AI-generated videos, there were recently a number released on various pro-Russian accounts purporting to show Ukrainian soldiers in distress, conscripted soldiers at the prospect of going to the front. And those are AI videos, at least the ones I'm thinking about. But this is something that we're certainly going to see more of, and it speaks to the devaluation of the evidence that we used to use and the devaluation of truth. And once we abandon truth, we'll abandon our free society. Because it's built on truths. We hold them to be self-evident. It's kind of right there.
I think we've all been able to see quite a lot of problems. We've seen degradations in, especially in the U.S. Just going from what's being plastered on the news, seeing some of the issues the UK is dealing with, and it's like, okay, so we kind of all agree that our kind of democracies are slowly slipping away from us, possibly faster in some areas. What do you propose to do to try and stop it?
I think democracy needs some, and the people who believe in democracy need to find some teeth and need to stop being coy about marketing, stop being coy about the values of democracy. For too long, I think we have accepted that yes, democracies have done some terrible things in their histories. Yes, this is true. However, in a democracy today, nobody's going to put you in the tiger chair for having a go at the traffic police online, as a particularly haunting video that came out of China shows. Video some years ago, pre-AI. So, and there
Now, when you
needs
say
to be.
stop being particularly coy about democracies, what could you give an example of that? What do you mean by being particularly coy about it? What are we not being assertive enough about?
I don't think we're being assertive enough about what makes our system better than the PRCs and better than certainly the Russian Federation's, better than Iran or Saudi Arabia's, better than what is proposed at home by various groups and parties on the far right and, of course, on the far left, neither of which could be described as democratic. And we need to say, no, this is nonsense. You're proposing socialism. You're proposing a flavor of fascism. Where's the self-correcting element? Where's the basic right to say, actually, no, I disagree. I think you're being a bit silly now. It's not there, and it's not going to work. And look at what democracy has achieved over the last 100 to 200 years. Look at what democracy and capitalism has done. It works. It's not perfect. Sometimes it's not even good, but it can self-correct when it messes up. And that is one of the key things that I really quite like about it. I worry that we are caught up too much and have been caught up too much in our own sort of self-reflection. I worry that we were far too confident at the end of the Cold War, and certainly the major democracies made a series of geopolitical errors and have lost their confidence. Certainly Europe.
I would contend that a lot of that is being pushed from the outside too. One of the things that we know the FSB does is it tries to encourage a narrative where people look at their own system, their democratic, system, and say, this doesn't work. We need to get rid of it. The obvious and proper fix is for a single authority figure who will tell us exactly how things should be run, because when we try to do things as a group, it doesn't work. And that's not true. Most people don't believe it, but nonetheless, it's an agenda that's being pushed down our throats. And, keep saying the same thing loudly and repetitively, and people will eventually begin to believe it.
And I think we ought to be doing some of that right back at them.
No kidding.
I really do want to watch ballet out of Russia. I can't wait to watch Tchaikovsky.
That took me a second. Swan Lake. So I did want to ask, I know Xandering has a question that I want to get to. I also wanted to ask sort of where we stand right now globally. If I recall, 45% of the world is under a complete dictatorship, and then there's a scaling upwards to better. And then I had one other question, which is just on a different, because you had mentioned that interview. I had seen that interview, and you have a lot of interviews, and I did want to ask, just as an aside, we've got your YouTube channel. You interview a lot of people. Clearly, you interviewed Hodges recently. What interview has shocked you the most, before we sort of get back to the main thread? Or have you learned the most, where it was just something that was just like, this I did not see coming?
The one I learned the most would be Taha Siddiqui and Adil Raja, simply due to my ignorance as to the political workings of Pakistan, and just how insidious the state there and the military deep state actually is. Taha Siddiqui is a journalist. He currently lives in France, runs a bar called the Dissidents Club in Paris, and he had to leave after an attempted forceful disappearance, which is an interesting euphemism that I don't know why we use, because a forceful disappearance is more or less 9 times out of 10 a murder. And Adil Raja is a former Pakistani army major who, again, had to leave after whistleblowing. And it was the level of control that the Pakistani state has over so much of Pakistani life that I was ignorant of. As for one that shocked me, it does take quite a lot to make me cry, so I don't know how much has shocked me. One of the first, in fact, the first was with Sheikh Said Ismagilov, who is a Ukrainian sheikh who fought in Bakhmut and across the lines as a combat medic. And some of his insights into the nature of the initial Russian occupation in 2014, where he was arrested, eventually released, and then another person he knew was arrested. And because the Russians are potentially somewhat incompetent at times, of course not always, he saw his name on a list of those to be bumped off and those to be murdered, at which point he fled and moved to Bucha, and was living in Bucha at the time of the full-scale invasion in 22, fled, and then liberated his own town months later. So that one was quite shocking. And the venue where we did it at is the Islamic Center in Kyiv, and recently got hit by a Shaheed, or a Shaheed fragment. So that's the first of the Why We Fight series.
All right, and then I also want to make sure I'm going to go snag your link right now and drop it myself in the live chat, so we've got it there. So is Andring, I know you had a question you wanted to ask. I want to make sure that we get to that. And then...
Yeah, I guess I want to kind of get your take on something that I thought about. Seems like the larger democracies get, the more likely they are to collapse, or, as the commander pointed out, be taken over. And I thought it all kind of boiled back down to anonymity. And it seems kind of weird at first, because I'm like, well, the larger it gets, the more anonymity you get. The more anonymity you get, the less you care about other people, because your groups get to be too large. You don't know who these people are. In the United States, somebody might know their representatives in Congress from their state. They might not, but they certainly don't know other people's unless they're a really high prominent person that is on the news all the time. Then they might know who they are. And so in that anonymity, lots of people get to do lots of things. The more anonymity and the larger things grow, it seems the larger and more often corruption starts to happen. And it just seems to get worse and degrade faster the larger things get. And it kind of boils back down to anonymity. People don't know what other people are doing. People who are doing bad things aren't facing people that know what they're doing and can see what they're doing and be held accountable for what they're doing. They can operate in the dark. Kind of one of the reasons why the internet is such a cesspool. And so I always thought that kind of anonymity was the downfall of great republics and democracies, and that we're actually going down that exact path right now. Do you think that I have any kind of an idea of what's going on there?
And before you answer that question, keep in mind that I have a preference as to whether you think he's full of it or knows what he's talking about, and that if my preferences are met, now this right here is not a democracy. So this is a good example of I have the whole control panel right here. Right. So I want you to think long and hard about your answer before that. Sorry, please.
Did he not? Did he not just say that we had to stand up and push back against these things and not be so quiet?
He did not. I did not hear that. No, sir. I did not hear that.
Fake news. Fake news.
Fake news. Exactly. Fake news.
I'm experiencing what is normal life for many people, where they don't quite know where the lines of acceptability are, and I am being asked a question by an authority figure. So I don't really care what you think about what I'm going to say.
That's the correct answer.
Yes, go for it.
That is the correct answer, sir. Please.
I don't think I entirely agree. I think, I wonder what you mean by size in terms of do you mean by population? Do you mean by GDP? Do you mean by sort of significance on the global stage?
By population and by complexity of what we're doing. The more and more people you have, the larger area, well, and also kind of geographic areas as well. As a country expands, such as the United States has expanded through history, it seems like we've become less free, less of a democracy, the larger we have gotten.
Let me interrupt and see if I can translate, because Zandering is a conservative. He's shown me a lot of interesting things about conservative in the American conservatism that I haven't thought of. But one of the things that he points out is in the original Constitution, the states were supposed to do a lot more of the governing, and there you knew who ran the show. You knew the legislature. You lived with them. Now everybody goes to Washington. Now, if you want to meet your state senator or representative or even the president, that's a lot harder. And now the public is anonymous. I think is that a good trying to steel man. So I think what he's pointing out is it's gotten so big now, and there's so many layers that people who make authoritarian decisions are removed from the people who might enforce consequences.
I also think we need to be careful in trying to apply the American situation onto other situations around the globe. I think, honestly, a lot of the problems that we're experiencing right now comes from what I would classify as imperial overreach, rather than necessarily
I think there's a shocking
an erosion
similarity
of democracy.
And I think there's a shocking similarity to what happened to Rome.
Yes,
As to what's happening to us, so it seems like when you go back and you see vastly or wildly successful democracies that take off and they expand, and I don't know if it's just an inherent thing that they start doing things that are negative that end up contributing to their downfall, and that's just kind of a cycle that a powerful country goes through. Or if, like I said, I was just trying to figure out, it's like, well, what are kind of some of the fundamental things? And one of the problems is, you're not facing the people who you're actually, or people tend to get more authoritarian and tend to want to grab more control and take more freedoms away from people, because they're not facing these people. They don't, they're just a large mass of people. And it just seems like anonymity is such a bad thing, and it's caused a lot of really bad problems throughout, especially the American system.
I think what you're describing are reasonable and very good arguments for federalism and for devolution of powers as close to the people as can be. I don't know if if your symptoms are if the root cause is the distance, or if it is education or interest, or it is possible. So to use a British perspective, if I email my member of parliament, they are obliged to respond. They have to. And it has to be a person. They have a lot of staffers doing this a lot of the time, but the staff will have to ask, what do I say to this constituent? So the most recent time I did it, I was demanding that they send more star streaks to Ukraine because they seem to work. And it's certainly a good argument for bringing power closer to people. I don't think Parliament or Congress should have much say in when the bins are taken out. But there are things which should be their purview: defense and insurance of basic human rights. The United States has been on an upward trend of freedom and democracy throughout its history. Its initial promises were not kept, and unfortunately, one of the great tragedies in my mind in the United States is the failure of the Reconstruction. And that meant that huge swathes of the American population were essentially completely disenfranchised, and the scars of that are still open today. So
So by failures, you mean like Jim Crow and the failure to enforce?
Slavery,
Okay.
Jim Crow,
Okay.
yeah.
Suppression
Which
of
Britain
labor
was not
movements.
immune to either. Britain, was one of the leading designers of the Atlantic slave trade, and our great crime is imperialism, and it's, in my view, important to recognize that, while also not being coy about the rather wonderful things that we've contributed to the world, like parliamentary democracy. So I don't know about anonymity, although I thought you were going down a social media route with this. I think anonymity on the internet and on social media is a problem, but I don't know how to solve it.
Yeah, I've talked about that too. I have never been anonymous. That's not true. I've been anonymous on the internet once or twice. I've used, a sock account to go onto X and see somewhere where I was banned. And what I realized was the more I played with those accounts, the more I did feel free to say or do whatever I wanted, because nobody knew it was me. I was just like, okay, that's it. I will never. So I always use my real name, because I'm just like, I can tell I would be more of an ass if I didn't. I can just tell that. And
yes, all of us can too.
Do you see what I mean, Theo? Do you see what I mean? This is why there have to be rules. I don't know who's gonna.
I'm still musing on anonymity and Isandring's question, because I'm slightly unhappy with my answer, but.
We'll have you back.
Power does need to, as much power needs to reside as close to those over which it is exercised as possible. People need to know who their local representatives are, what their powers are, and how they can get them to, how they can reach them. And there does need to be a careful limit on the amount of power that a centralized government or the central government can exert. But one of the main things it needs to do is ensure that, as much as possible, people start life on a reasonable level playing field in terms of what we would call in the United Kingdom protected characteristics. And I don't think that's easy.
And it seems to be getting
this is
harder
my new favorite
in the US.
guest. I am requiring you to have him on every week.
So do you want to make him a junior co-host?
The case for the Constitution of the United States.
I know why.
Absolutely.
Well, that's why I reframed you.
I really do enjoy the Constitution. I am a Constitution enjoyer. There are some things which I think maybe slightly in error, but and the main thing being how difficult it is to alter, because, as I've said before, times change, and a body that does not move will eventually fall behind. And the way the Constitution is designed is on purpose to make it extremely difficult to change, but it is too difficult. Whereas in the United Kingdom, we have no such.
You're using
no such
the
issues.
words. You're using the words "fall behind" as a euphemism for rot from within, right?
Yeah, more or less.
Okay.
I was perhaps being a little too British for that, but the United Kingdom has, as I'm sure you will all know, the exact opposite problem. We have no codified constitution. If anybody says it's unwritten, though, I'll reach and bap you on the head. It's written in a lot of different places, and it's hard to go and read it all. But the United Kingdom has this wonderful way of holding the executive to account, where they have to come to the legislature, because they're a part of it, and get shouted at once a week.
Which for us is very surreal to watch. Like they're insulting each other. It's like, what the hell is that?
I was like, we are here in the United States are really missing out. Some TV executive or streaming service really needs to get that together and give highlights, and we need to cover that as a weekly show, because it is freaking brilliant to watch that.
There are some real bangers in Prime Minister's questions. One of the more famous ones was in reference to Gordon Brown, by Sir Vince Cable, said over the course of his premiership, he has morphed from Stalin into Mr. Bean.
Oh,
I love it.
well, Marjorie Taylor Greene has changed. Will be worse than that pretty soon. Well, though I don't know. That's a whole nother. I'm not. So I have one question in two parts, because I ask all my questions in parts because I'm an ass, and then I'll see if anyone else has any wrap ups. So, sort of for my final question, sort of. You had said that with Reconstruction, and we had sort of botched that, and as you pointed out, every democracy makes mistakes, and then there are ones that can fix them and catch up, and there are ones that, as you said, fall behind. What led to where the U.S. is now, in as much as our vulnerabilities to Trumpism? And what escape, if any, do we have from what appears to be a coalescing of executive power in a very dictatorial way? Let me put it in another way. People ask me all the time, because I do the news, they're like, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think the U.S. can possibly survive this? I was like, look, it's going to be one of basically three different endings. One of the more likely ones is we break up into smaller, whatever. But I don't know. So because I have to suffer that, now I'm going to ask you, and we'll hold you accountable for whatever you say. So now, for all posterity, what are your thoughts? How did we get here, and where do we go from here, or what are we looking at?
I am prepared to disavow anything I say if it proves to be wrong.
Listen, once you've come on this show, you've lost all dignity. You don't.
It is wise. Yeah, it is wise to reserve that right upon yourself anytime you appear on a show with Nick.
Yes, exactly. Just you're. In fact, it happens so often; it's normally assumed. But okay, if you have to say it, yeah.
I think two. And this is something I lived in the United States briefly, but this is very much an outsider's perspective looking in. The wounds of the Civil War have never been healed.
Absolutely.
Because they were allowed to fester. What was needed after the conflagration of the Civil War, after this deep gash in the side of the United States, was a hot poker and to cauterize that wound, and it would have hurt in the moment, but that wound would have been allowed to heal. And unfortunately, for more than a century, that wound was allowed to fester, and we're still feeling the effects of that today. The Confederacy should be regarded as what it is, a failure, an embarrassment, and the jus ad bellum that the North had, especially after the Emancipation Proclamation, is one of the few just wars. A war of liberation is pretty high up there, if you consider it to be that. John Brown is also one of my favorite Americans, so I'm quite firebrand on this. Slavery is bad, and then you have globalization. Now, I am generally a defender of globalization. I'm certainly one of my favorite people to watch is Professor Sally Payne of the U.S. Naval War College. She heads up the strategy.
Yeah.
And she is fantastic. And she talks quite a lot about the difference in maritime and continental powers and the global trading order, the global maritime trading order. It's fantastic. Everybody makes a lot of money. Prosperity increases. War becomes a real pain in the ass. Nobody wants to do it. I like that. And that is cornerstone of globalization. However, globalization in the developed nations left swathes of people behind, and those people were more or less abandoned. If you go to the United Kingdom, you can find abandoned mining towns where the coal pits closed in the 80s, and they are husks. And you can certainly find the same across the entire Rust Belt in the United States. And I think one of the best examples of this is the coal fields of West Virginia, which traditionally extremely blue area. But they saw the way the wind was blowing, The mines were closing, people were losing their jobs. And when people lose their jobs in communities like that, the community is destroyed. And that's deeply emotive. And just like in the 1980s, nothing was done. In the 1980s in the United Kingdom, under Thatcher, nothing was done. So now you have large groups of people who feel they have lost an enormous amount. And in the United States, you couple that with the festering wounds from the Civil War, which have never quite healed. And it's a witch's brew of bitterness and anger. And that has poisoned discourse. And you have the primary process, which is a little bizarre, which forces people to the extremes of whichever party they are hoping to run for. And so I guess that's my diagnosis. As for the cure, Isandro's going to disagree with me, but then there needs to be a sort of return to Keynesianism and massive investments in these areas which have been left behind, to return prosperity to them. And it is going to involve raising taxes on the really very wealthy. And that might
And
be
corporations.
Oh, and certainly in corporations. And just ethically, I want to remind so-called sovereign individuals that they are not, because they're a major threat to our democracy. One of the reasons I feel when I go on Twitter as a small d Democrat, I am treading onto hostile ground is because the man who owns it does not believe in liberal democracy. He believes in this sort of techno-feudalism. And that sort of person, that sort of idea needs to be addressed and needs to be dissected and taken apart.
All right.
Well,
Thank you.
The person needs to be dissected. Just for clarification.
Well,
the idea.
Well, never mind it. Well, I mean, in some cases, I was thinking maybe okay, if you're, I guess, if that's too much for you, fine. I did want to really quick gifted 5 memberships. Niels G. Kunderson, thank you very much for the gift. That was quite some time ago, and the conversation was going really well. And every time I was going to do it, either a good question got asked or we started joking around. And I didn't want to interrupt that. But thank you very much for the gift of the 5 memberships. Thank you very much, Theo, for answering my question. Commander, did you have any final thoughts or questions for Theo?
No, not really. I think he and I see very much eye to eye on a lot of what has been said today.
All right. Well, perfect. Thank you very much, Commander, for joining us today. So I know it's a little early for you, and I after we had Theo on the first time, I said we gotta have Lance with him for the second time. It's gonna be great.
It's been a pleasure.
Is Andering, any other questions that we didn't get to? Any final questions or thoughts that you have that you wanted before we go?
I got a final thought and a final question. My final thought was, I don't know that we're going to be as far apart, especially on solving it. I am not necessarily against some of Keynes's ideas. I'm not necessarily against supporting, because capitalism does have a difficult time with especially that bottom percentage that does need to be addressed. I have a little bit more concerns on how you do it and who is doing it. And then my final question is, so the people watching have come to the brilliant conclusion after watching your well-put arguments and descriptions that this is absolutely a problem and I need to get involved and try and stop it. What would be the best thing for the viewers to actually do to try and help preserve the democracies around the world?
Get involved in political life in whatever way that is. I'm not saying go and run for office. I am saying if you're interested in a particular... if you're interested in an issue, if something concerns you, say the treatment of animals in a certain sector, get involved. Do something. If you are worried, then speak to other people. And one thing I really want to emphasize is you will encounter people who disagree with you. Good. This is a good thing. Take nothing personally. Always leave a door open and find the people, because there are people in the democracies who don't believe in democracy, but there are those who are just bloody tired with everything that's going on. And find the people who are maybe persuadable. And don't hammer everything, and just find a common ground. Because we see this in Britain over certain issues like Brexit, where it has become almost a defining factor of where you are politically. What do you think of Brexit? And the same happens in the United States. And when it's very unhealthy for democracies to have amps like this, where nothing is happening between them. So we will all have common ground in some way, shape, or other. Generally, people experience similar things in life and have similar concerns. Find that and have a conversation about it. And for the love of God, do not dehumanize your political opponents.
Absolutely beautiful way to end the show. So thank you very much, Theo. Thank you for coming back, and we hope to have you again sometime. We've put your channel up in the live chat. It should be in the description too a couple of times, but he has a lot of interviews. He's talked about them, but I think it's excellent work. So one place you could also start is going to his channel and maybe speaking with him some more. And we are going to have him back because, first of all, he can tolerate our sense of humor, and that's not a lot of people. So, I mean, he came back willingly. I didn't actually have to pay him. That's a...
Wait, you guys get paid?
No, I was about to say, does that mean I get my paycheck this month?
I get all the dehydrated water I can ask for.
You're not going to get your paycheck this month, Xandring, but you'll get double next month.
Okay.
Yeah.
Isn't that how the federal government pays people?
Yes, that is exactly how. That's where I learned. That's where I learned my pay. Congress is out right now, but once it gets back into session, don't worry, you'll get paid. Maybe, sort of, a percentage. We'll see. I'm not comfortable with this subject. I thought Titan. I need some moderation. I thought we had some rules about what we would discuss on air. Payment was not one of them. Of course, I started this conversation. But anyways, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much for having me back. It was a very interesting conversation.
And to those of you in the audience, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to the mods. Our next scheduled show is Downtime with Commander McMillan. Lance and I will be on 9 p.m. on this Thursday. And my suspicion is...
I might crash your party.
It's been a while since you've been on Downtime. So it
has been.
I'm feeling
a little left out.
You're feeling left out? Okay, well, come on in and join us.
I have not allowed the commander to yell at me for an idiotic view that I have in quite a while, so I need my fix.
Okay, we'll do that. Well,
I need to learn more of these alleged idiotic views.
Oh, I've got a lot of them. Just ask Nick.
Well, listen, I used to debate on a number of issues, BA in philosophy, and I.
Oh wait! Before you get going too much on that, you just brought it up, and it reminded me from the beginning, and I didn't want to interrupt then. But since we're at the end of the show,
Sure.
BA, you philosopher, you.
Yes, sir.
You couldn't even quote Hobbes. You had to get somebody to the most famous quote of Hobbes, and you couldn't remember the whole quote.
Every time I do the quote, I know I forget the lonely. Oh, he's got the.
I've got it somewhere, but
mine is in.
If I can be bothered to find it.
You probably shouldn't. Well, that's what the internet is for. But I've got my classics of Western philosophy. But Xandring is a conservative, and he's on the right, and he But I have never once had him deliberately strawman an argument. If I tell him he's strawmanning me, he's always listened, and I try to treat him the same way. And so I think that's one of the things that works really great with this show. And you've seen it here, the two of us give each other a hard time. But the reality is, I've argued the Second Amendment with a lot of people, and Xander is the only one who made genuine arguments that I'm sitting there going, okay, you know what, you've actually really got a point. And he's I don't like to give him credit for this, but it's been a good show, so I'll say he's smarter than he gets credit for. So
I don't like giving you credit for your anti-Second Amendment, your anti-gun stances, and yet I'm perfectly willing to point out when that's actually a good argument.
Yeah, I do.
And I may not have an answer to it.
Please, sir.
FPV drones, would they be covered under the Second Amendment?
Well, it depends.
That's a good question. We probably should not get into this. Thanks, Theo. Okay.
Do we want to get into what is
the 3 hours? Yeah. By an originalist, basically all they're talking about is a rifle that you have to front load. But
a musket. Yeah.
Yeah, a musket.
I had a shotgun when I lived in the States. I was a Second Amendment enjoyer. But as with all things, balance.
Well,
all right.
I've said before several times, the Second Amendment should have been amended after the First World War, and absolutely after the Second World War. And what pisses me off is the way that they went about trying to control some guns that we can all, or weapons that we can all agree that probably shouldn't be just freely open to whoever. Maybe Elon or somebody,
Yeah.
We can understand. It's like, okay, that's a reasonable position. Today we can understand reasonable positions. I can absolutely say, yeah, it's probably a bad idea to allow the private ownership of nuclear arms. But kind of the way that they went about it, and this also comes back to your point of, hey, the Constitution has become way too difficult to amend, which is probably why they didn't try that avenue. So I have a little bit of a problem with the way in which things have gone about, not necessarily the idea of absolutely controlling access to certain weapons.
Well, you're on
I'd quite like to discuss the Second Amendment more.
You're on our Discord, so you can chat with Xandring and myself, or whoever you want to. So those of you in the live chat, come join our Discord. I'm sure Theo will take questions from the audience as well, if anybody wants to say hi. And we look forward to seeing all you guys. And we're going to have you back, because I think this is just way too much interesting. We should bring you back for a downtime and open up the topic a bit more too. So that'll be great. So thank you all for joining us, and we will also go with any breaking news. They are voting. Last I heard when we started on the not the discharge petition, but the actual release.
Oh,
no, the discharge petition is already
release.
The actual release. It's going to pass. I'm tempted to cover it because historically it's significant, but the reality is we know it's going to pass. The question is it going to pass in the House? I suspect it will. In the Senate. And then if it does, he's going to sign it. And then what does he do? And he's either going to release it heavily redacted, or he's going to say, sorry, open an investigation. That's where the story is. So we're not going to take it too seriously until that happens. So it'll be on our Discord, and we have our whole news section on our Discord. So when this passes, you'll see it in the news section. Don't expect breaking unless there's something else associated with it, I think. And other than that, our next show will be Thursday. So thank you all for joining us. Thanks again to our guest, Theo. Thank you to Xandring and to Commander Lance McMillan for joining us. Thanks again to the mods. And we will see you all Thursday. Have a good night.